Well, welcome. I'm not sure how often you all meet.
Once a month.
Once a month. I think it's wonderful that there is a postdoc association and that graduate students who are pre-postdocs, in a sense, are invited as well. I think having a place where you all can talk about what's going on in your lives is really important. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Schrott. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacology, Toxicology, and Neuroscience here, and I've been here since May of 2003. So I've been here a little over 9 years, about nine and a quarter years. There are so many things that we could talk about in work-life balance, and I have an outline of a couple of topics that I want to throw out, but I really want to leave this a little wiggle room for areas that you all think are important. And I'm going to start off by talking a little personally about my life, because the things that we're going to talk about, work-life balance, are personal things. And I want to kind of set the tone that some of these issues can be tough to discuss, and they can also be, there's no one right answer. And I'm a single faculty member out of many faculty here, and so the kinds of things that I'll address, any of the faculty here could kind of give you a perspective on work-life balance. I also want to mention at the outset an incredibly wonderful resource for looking at these issues. How many of you know the journal Science? Everybody knows Science, right? Everybody's aspiration is to publish a paper in Science, right?
No.
Or Nature. Science has a whole section on their website called Science Magazine Careers, and it is wonderful. It has job skills, networking, resumes, but there's one section of the Science Careers that's entitled, what's it entitled? It's called Work and Life. There's one whole section that's Work and Life. Lots of articles. There are bloggers. If any of you are interested in being bloggers, there are bloggers for science who blog on work life. And there's one who actually got quite famous. She went by a pseudonym of Marcella Phoenix DeWeiss, and she blogged for 6 years from graduate school through her entire postdoctoral experience, from 2000 to like 2000 or 2002 to 2008. All of them are on there, and it recounts her entire experience as a graduate student and a postdoc and making the decision to leave science. At the end of the blog, the last chapter is called End of the Road, and she takes a job in another industry, but it recounts her struggles as a graduate student and a postdoc trying to find her way, and she's very, very honest. And it's very refreshing to see somebody. She uses a pseudonym, which is probably smart, since her committee members might be reading the blog, and you don't necessarily want to be offending them with what you're saying on a platform like that. But when I put into the science career, into the science area on work and life, just the word balance, 694 individual articles came up. And I'm just going to read you the title of some of these to give you an idea of the diversity of topics that are on this website. Work and life balance. For some people, work-life balance means career and family. For others, it's work and having a social life. Whatever the situation, it's tricky to manage. One titled On Balance, which starts, my cell phone rings while I'm immersed in writing a manuscript in my office. A publication deadline is looming, but my teenage son needs help with a calculus problem. Putting on my good mother hat, I stop to help him. When I return to my task, I realize that I've not only lost an important reference, but also my train of thought. Scientists as parents, reclaiming life from work. For physician scientist couples, success is balance. One entitled The Circus Ringmaster. I would like to draw your attention to the center ring. High above the ground, a graduate student attempts a nearly impossible feat. He will walk across a tightrope suspended 100 feet in the air without a safety net, while balancing a part-time job, full-time graduate studies, a wife, and 2 small children. Quiet, please, the drum roll. A cosmologist resists academia's work-life norms. Making science and family fit. A physician researcher thrives in the balance. So there are work, life, and industry, thinking outside the 9-to-5 box. Everybody thinks that it'll be a lot easier in industry and it'll be a more 9-to-5 job, and this talks about that. So balance and love. How can we incorporate love into the perspective? So I would really encourage you to check out Science's website, and it's sciencecareers.sciencemag.org. But if you go to Science's website, they have a whole section on science careers, and all of their tips from networking to work-life balance are wonderful, and I got a lot of my resources from there. So as I said in the beginning, I want to start off personal, because when we're talking about work-life balance, we're talking about our personal lives. And one of the big challenges in looking at work-life issues is expectations. How many people here have struggled with meeting expectations? Either your own expectations, your parents' expectations, a partner's expectations, child's expectations, your mentor's expectations, your committee members' expectations, your department chair's expectations. There are a lot of people that have expectations about how you're going to spend your time. And to me, the biggest challenge in managing work-life balance is understanding the fact that a lot of people have expectations about you, and you have expectations about about your life and about your career trajectory. And we all have these kind of dreams that I'm going to graduate from college, I'm going to do my PhD in 4 to 5 years, I'm going to do a postdoc for 3 years, I'm going to get a tenure track faculty position, I'm going to get my first grant, publish 5 papers in Nature, get tenure, become a department chair, and this very nice linear path. And one of the reasons why people in academia tend to think this linear path is because our whole lives have been linear. We have been career students, where you go from first grade to second grade to third grade, you graduate from high school, you do your college, you graduate. So everybody kind of has this linear trajectory thinking. And then all of a sudden you get to graduate school and your postdoc, and that linearity just falls right away. A mentor loses a grant, and a project or a job that you thought you were going to work on disappears. Somebody leaves an institution, an area that you thought you might go into vanishes. Your spouse can't get a job in the area that you're looking at. So we need to kind of let go of this kind of linear expectation that all of this is going to happen in this beautiful sequence, and it's all going to work out like it would in a novel or in a movie. It just doesn't happen that way, and so we have to let go of our own expectations that way, and that's hard for us, particularly as mentors, as faculty, because we want to bring you in and we want to bring you on as close to that kind of linear trajectory as we can, and it often doesn't happen. So I want to talk a little bit about my trajectory up to this point, because I think it highlights a couple of different areas where other people's expectations kind of influenced how my work-life balance, the challenges in work-life balance for me, and how I as an individual dealt with them, which isn't to say that any of you would necessarily go down that path, but just to kind of raise a few issues, and then I'm going to open it up for some discussion questions for you all. So first off, I started off on that very nice linear trajectory that I talked about. I graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in biology and went on to a PhD program straight from my undergraduate work, and did my PhD in 5.5 years and graduated at 27 with my PhD. So very nice little linear, just kind of what you would expect. I started dating my now husband my last year in graduate school, my 5th year in graduate school. Not the optimal time to start a relationship your last year in graduate school. But he got to see me while I was writing my dissertation, and I figured if he could, survive me dissertation writing, that was a good sign. And I was at the University of Connecticut in the Northeast, and he was not in science. He had a real job. A real job, which meant he could take me out on real dates, which is a real plus when you're a graduate student, dating somebody who has a real job and can actually afford to take you out to dinner and things like that. So that we put in a plug for that. So when I was getting ready to finish, we'd been dating for a year or so, and we weren't incredibly serious. And I just went ahead and looked for fellowship positions that interested me. And I was in Connecticut, and I applied at 3 locations, had 3 offers, one at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, which is actually about 15 minutes from where I grew up. So Mom and Dad were heavily pushing for me to go to NIH. That was about 7 hours from Connecticut. The University of Pittsburgh, which is actually historically where my parents were from. They both had grown up in Pittsburgh. Lots of relatives there. Lovely place, about a 5-hour drive from Connecticut. Or the University of Colorado Medical School in Denver. I went to Denver and I loved Denver. It was just a gorgeous location. The mentor that I chose to work with was great. The project was wonderful. It was actually a follow-up project from my PhD work, but also allowed me to learn a lot of molecular biology and actually learn a lot of immunology while I was there. And so I decided to go to Denver. Parents' expectations, they were really bummed. My dad's like, you could move back home. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. Don't think so, Dad. All my high school friends, oh, it'll be great. My boyfriend's expectations that I would be geographically close enough to drive, nope, I'm going to go to Denver. And so we embarked upon a 3-year long-distance relationship. And this is actually relatively common in science because people's career, even if you're in a relationship with a scientist, your timing often doesn't match up exactly right. It's hard to match 2 people getting their degrees at exactly the same time or being ready for the next step in their career at exactly the same time. Fortunate for me, my now husband took a job in Minneapolis about 6 months after I left Connecticut. And Minneapolis and Denver were a lot closer to each other and both served by Hub Airlines, which meant we could fly back and forth cheaply. So right off the bat, that kind of, I'm going to have to make some adjustments here. So we did this long distance. And I want to put a wonderful plug in for my postdoc mentor because I'm going to say something negative in a second. She was an incredibly nurturing postdoc mentor. I worked with her for 3 years, and I specifically went to work with her. She had a 2-year-old son when I started in the lab, and actually when I interviewed with her at a conference, she had her baby underneath her poster in a basket. Her mother came to the conference and baby was underneath the poster loving all the stimulation. So she was somebody that was actually very supportive of balancing career and family. And she was very flexible with me and my schedule and allowing me to work a lot of weekends, not allowing me to work a lot of weekends, postdocs work a lot of weekends, but allowing me to take long weekends so that Brian and I could travel and be in the same location. So I would often take a Monday through, or a Thursday through Monday, or a Friday through Monday, 4 days off and go spend time with him, and then work like the next couple of weekends. So we were able to see each other about once a month, once every 6 weeks. Well, as my fellowship was ending, I was able to get an NRSA grant while I was there that funded my research. So my NRSA was coming to an end, and I needed to start looking for jobs. Denver is one of those locations where people go to when they don't want to leave. Everybody loves Denver. Everybody's trying to stay in Denver. And they tell you when you get there, you're going to get funding for this many years and that's it. I mean, that is it. You will not get. And so everybody's scrambling to find a job. And so my husband had a good job. My then boyfriend, now husband, had a good job in Minneapolis. And so I said, well, Minneapolis is a big city, lots of universities. I'll just look for a position there. And this is where other people's expectations, again, kind of butt up against your own life, and you have to deal with the reality of that. I had a very successful postdoc, and the area of research that I was doing was in kind of behavioral immunology. It was kind of a new field at that time, and I managed to publish 5 papers during my 3-year postdoc, and got invited to a Nobel Foundation symposium in Stockholm, and so things were going really great. And so my postdoc mentor kind of expected that I was going to start looking for academic positions. Even though it might have been, at that time, you know, this was 1998 or so, 1996 actually. And, you know, at that time, you could kind of get away with maybe a 3-4 year postdoc. Now, that's less common if you're going to be doing postdoc for a longer period of time. So her expectation was that things were going great. I should just be applying for academic positions. I was ready to go into an academic job. But I wasn't ready to go into an academic job. You know, I had written a grant and I had been successful getting an NRSA, but I saw, you know, what a lot of people were struggling with, and I wasn't sure that I really wanted the full academic career at that point in my life. So I chose to do a second postdoc and go into somebody's lab at the University of Minnesota. And in a sense, I changed fields a little bit. I actually went into pharmacology. I had no training in pharmacology. And it's kind of ironic now that I teach all this pharmacology, because I took like 1 class in graduate school in pharmacology. So I moved into a pharmacology department. I was able to get on a training grant for a year and then write a grant that I had what they call a career development award, a K award, a 5-year grant that actually paid for my research and allowed me to have a research faculty position there. But it was important for my husband and I to be in the same location. We were at that point of long distance for 3 years where we're like, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And we kind of need to be in the same place to do this. And so I made a personal decision to do a second postdoc and move to Minneapolis. And my postdoc mentor was not enthusiastic about this, partly because the guy that I went to work with was notoriously difficult and abrasive and just not a nice person. And everybody knew this and everybody warned me. And I'm like, no, it's no problem, no, I can handle it, well. You know, in retrospect, it turned out okay, but there were some difficult years in there. And so that was, I had to manage her expectations. She was somebody that was really important to me. She was a wonderful mentor and had been very supportive. And she thought at this point in my career that I should be doing this. And I'm saying, for personal reasons, I want to do this. And I'm going to deviate, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to do a second postdoc, and kind of essentially turn my back on the research area that I had worked on through my PhD work and my postdoc, and had kind of developed a little niche in, which was working on autoimmune disorders and kind of behavioral consequences of autoimmune diseases, and go into a different area of kind of developmental pharmacology. I have to say, you know, when I called her about 6 months after I'd been there saying, oh my God, you were right, this is bad. She never said, I told you so. And she was very supportive in helping me kind of get my legs back. So I went on then and did a second postdoc, which I was able to then transition into what they call research faculty. Research faculty are becoming more and more common. These are non-tenure track positions that are dependent upon soft money, meaning grant money. And I was able to get a grant that funded my research. It allowed me to hire a technician. I actually had a graduate faculty appointment and had a graduate student at the University of Minnesota, and then moved here. And my poor graduate students, well, she stayed in Minnesota and finished her degree with one of my collaborators, and when I moved to Shreveport. But then my husband had to pick up. We got married while we were in Minnesota, then he had to pick up and move to Shreveport. And he had to give up a really good job there to come to a very different economy here in Shreveport. And that was really a challenge. And so, you know, I had challenges when I first moved to Minneapolis with the moving into a different lab that was very different than the kind I had known. he had challenges when he moved here trying to find a job that fit him, and he ended up actually going back to school. So I tell you this story, not because it's remarkable, but because it's actually pretty common. As you go through the academic world, you're not going to see one set model of how this works. There's going to be times when people are in the same location as their partners. There's going to be times when they're separated. We chose not to have children, but if we had had children, that would have been a whole nother issue of trying to figure out how to get them in school and balance them and all of that kind of thing. So I want to turn it over to you guys. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to actually write your answers on the board, and then we'll talk through a couple of things. I want you to tell me what you think in terms of an academic career. And we're going to focus on academia, even though a lot of people might be thinking about industry or government jobs, is because we're at an academic institution right now, and that's what we are kind of common baseline on. What do you think are the challenges in academia, and what do you think are the opportunities for work-life balance? Because I don't want to think of this all in the negative sense. When we talk about work-life balance, we're often talking about how negative it is, and we have to work so much and we can't find time and all of these things. But I think there are also some opportunities in academia that are a little bit different from other disciplines that give us some opportunities in work-life balance. So I'm going to put on one side challenges, and I'm going to put on another opportunities. So I want you guys to kind of tell me, in your experience, or things that you've heard of, or things that your friends have said, are challenges and things that are opportunities. Yeah.
I may start.
Sure.
I'll start on the right side. Mm-hmm. Flexible schedule.
Okay.
That's for sure. As the parent with kids, that's very important that I can drop off the experiment, not completely forget about it, but just make it. I can fix my experiment at 4 a.m. or 10 p.m. whenever I want. I don't have to work from 9 to 5.
Right. So flexibility is an opportunity. Would you also say there are challenges in that?
Well, when I have to come in on Saturday 7 p.m., it's a challenge. But I'd say that they kind of even each other,
right?
Because
so
you have to pay.
You would say on the net result that this flexibility is a plus.
Absolutely, because I'd prefer to go to my kids recital at 1 p.m. and then pay for it on the weekend,
right?
Rather than do not have any opportunity to do that, to go somewhere where I really need to because of family business.
On the flexibility side, and of course I'm like a new postdoc, but
that's
this is something that I'm realizing is that the challenge with the flexibility is in the expectations column.
Yes.
Because, especially like if you were with your partner, from grad school up until, the postdoc phase, that there's this expectation, oh yeah, you can just show up and do this and do that at the drop of a dime, and what if for this moment in time, I don't have it? But now it's the expectation that was, that's normal, and it's, my flexibility is kind of when I want to be flexible, not when you want me to be flexible.
Right. And I'm going to raise in a few minutes, when we talk about balancing work-life, we often talk about the compromises that we have to make it work and how we have to try to figure out things. But it's just as important to have that kind of communication on the life side that sometimes you're not going to be able to do, and your partners need to realize that. I told my husband we couldn't get married till he saw me write a grant, because I get crazy when I write a grant. I literally get crazy. I think a lot of faculty members do.
Well, another thing saying, about this, scheduling and expectations. Pretty much, if you think about 9 to 5 job, most of them, from my point of view, are probably subjective. They're not so exciting. And if you talk about commitment to any kind of job, I have a bunch of friends who work at what considered to be a 9 to 5, and then on Saturdays, Sundays, they start at 7, they finish at 11 p.m. It's intellectual stimulation.
Right, and it's in general a stimulating, invigorating job.
So because of that, you have to explain your partner that I can accept 9 to 5, but probably in 2 years I will kill myself over boredom.
Yeah, most of us here have never kind of worked that 9 to 5 job, don't even know, I mean, I remember,
I did.
my husband, he's one of these people that kind of prefers that. He loves to come home at night and have nothing to do. And I realized at one point that I couldn't remember a time when I had come home and had nothing, like no work, no residual work. I mean, I went right from, undergraduate to graduate school, and then I took, 2 weeks off before my postdoc, and so, every job is just kind of rolled into the next. And I've always had there's never been a time when I haven't. You're never bored, let's put it that way. There's always an article to read.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. What other opportunities and challenges?
Well, I think on the opportunity side, come from a graduate student perspective, a first year person just got here, but like meeting different types of people. I think that it's really, you get to collaborate with a lot of different people, you get to meet different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Not always stuck in this repetitive schedule of seeing the same people over and over.
You do. There is a lot of diversity, and I'm going to even enhance that a little bit, and I'm going to use the word community. You bond with the people that you're going through your graduate student experiences with, your postdocs, even the greater scientific community when you go to conferences and things like that. You are part of a community. You have a label, and that can be, graduate students. I mean, there's lots of, blogs and websites where, people can, moan and make great videos, and, I mean, if you have, everybody seen the Lady Gaga, Bad Project. I mean, that's like, the ultimate sense of community, that you can watch that and completely identify with, the Western blot, on there. But there is a real sense of community that you often don't get in other jobs, and getting to meet diverse people that you would not encounter.
Well, yeah, I would also add diversity in terms of places.
Yes.
Because I from my experience, I mean, yeah, you probably can relatively easily find a job if you move inside the States. But also, once you graduate from the grad school, you can embark on the trip to Europe or, I don't know, Japan, and imagining that and pay for it by yourself.
Right.
Otherwise, you just pay for a ticket, and the challenge comes with that.
Right. So I'm going to actually put geography in the challenge column,
moving
too.
your family.
Because this is probably, as I've looked at my friends and colleagues, probably been one of the biggest challenges. If you have two scientists in a career trying to find jobs at the same institution or reasonably close to each other, it is a challenge. Especially if you're not in a large city like New York or Washington or Boston, where there are ample opportunities. If there are differences in the timing, geography can be a challenge. If you have a spouse that has a job, you may need to stay in that location and kind of find something that fits you. And this can be a challenge to marketing yourself, because you want to be the best person for the job, not just because you're here, but because you're the best person for the job. And so the geography can be a challenge. And I know that it's often looked at. I have a really good friend who's a professor at the University of Minnesota. And she got her PhD there, and she did a postdoc there, and then she actually got a faculty position there. And that's very unusual, to have your whole career at one institution. And people there, she has a hard time with people viewing her independently, and not thinking that she's just doing what her graduate advisor and postdoc mentor did. It can be hard to carve out your niche and be seen independent if you remain in the same geographic location. But oftentimes, for a myriad of reasons, a parent who's ailing and you need to be nearby, other kinds of family issues, or you just really happen to like that location. You're a surfer. If you've ever been to La Jolla and seen University of California, San Diego, you're a surfer. You're going to be doing whatever you want. You can. You'll be sweeping the floors at Scripps in order to stay there and be able to walk out the door and go surfing. So, there's lots of reasons why people choose, geographic things. Mm-hmm.
On the challenges side, so I guess it's the same issue that most of us will attest to as far as graduate school, or the idea, like you said, like you have this linearity of the process of, okay, I go from first to second to third. But as a postdoc, particularly, like the idea of direction or directionality becomes, it becomes very difficult to really manage, because at this point you have more freedom than you ever had. Like, so in my experience, like just the idea of deciding where I was going to do my postdoc, I could have continued very much so in the area that I was in, where I can break away and try to take a little tidbit, and no one really can tell you what is right or what's wrong. It's just whatever you feel like doing. And so while you're in the midst of it, especially once again, like Mike said, it's like, okay, when you have a family, like who do you talk to about it? Because you're really the only expert about what may be the best choice for you. So, that is very challenging, because once again, it's the flexibility of your career. It's like, I'm trained in biomedical science. I can do anything. But
I can run a Western blot on whatever you'd like me to run a Western blot on, and I think especially, but people will often say, well, when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to have your, and there's a whole lot of floating kind of time in academia where you're, by all objective measures, you have a PhD, you have a lot of experience, you should, people should be worshiping the ground you walk on, and yet you're still in kind of that no man's land, that kind of flex, trying to describe to people, what you're doing and things, and that can be challenging, because we don't fit into that nice, neat little, process.
Yeah, there's one more thing, especially in a current economic state, instability. You cannot count, because we experienced it personally. I am moving every year. I'm not moving physically, but pretty much every year I tell my wife, there is a chance that we're gonna move. So we're gonna stay in this apartment. We cannot, have anything stable. And every year it's over. We're gonna move. We had to renew the lease contract. I had no idea how much time do I have left here, and that's the problem, especially when your boss can come to you and say, sorry, you have 3 more months. And it's not your fault. We can't renew the grant.
Exactly. I'm glad you raised that, because that, I think, is a big, big challenge for people.
And what's another thing? It's probably very personal, but even more than that is when you're told that there's 3 months gap that you can find the job, and you look for the job like crazy, and you finally find one in 2.5 months, so you have 2 weeks left. And then the boss approaches you right next day after you sign the offer. It says, we found the money for another 7 months, so you can finish the project. And you have to deal with either call the guy you just signed the job offer with and tell him, no, thank you, and embark on another 7 months journey
with more instability.
Exactly. But finishing the project and potentially renewing the grant, or having a paper or not. It happened to me exactly next day. After I signed the job offer, my boss said, we actually got 7 months worth of money.
Instability is a real challenge for work-life balance. And it's especially challenging in the postdoc years. And in fact, for graduate students, I think some graduate students actually stay in graduate school longer because of the stability. I'm not kidding when I say that. People say, everybody wants to graduate. But you kind of, by your fifth year, you know what you're doing, you got a rhythm, you kind of know what the expectations are, you can hang out, you figured out that work-life balance in graduate school. So there's some stability there. But the postdoc years are notoriously unstable. And it's challenging for relationships because you're constantly saying, I'm not sure when, I'm not sure when, I'm not sure where I'm going to be, I'm not sure, and I ultimately, one of the reasons why after 7 years in Minnesota, I decided I wanted a hard money position because I was tired of the instability. I was tired of having to know that I needed a grant in order to pay my salary. So I started looking for tenure track positions, which meant that my husband was going to have to move, or I was going to have to try to find something in Minneapolis. So the instability is really challenging on relationships. It's challenging for you personally. It affects your relationship with your mentor. It affects your relationship with your friends, your spouse, your children, everybody. So that is a big, big challenge. Any other ones that you guys want to throw out?
Yeah, I'm thinking of it.
What?
Well, it's kind of getting much into the detail. It's not what probably going to be challenges, but if you have a family of 2 scientists,
Yes.
you either have to decide who's going to lead, and another person just have to sacrifice, or you not with the problem with 2 scientists is we had examples, especially in microbiology department,
Yes.
of couples working there. Micro is famous for that.
Yes.
But generally, it's really, really hard to find places for both.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you have one scientist and one just ambitious person
Right.
with her own career,
You
can
may
depend on
end
that
up
too.
having to follow, think about a military spouse. We
Oh.
actually had a student in our department at one point whose husband was in the military. It's virtually impossible to have an academic career with a partner who's got to move every 2 years. And in many jobs, that may be the case. And so, 2 scientists have a set of challenges. There was actually the latest blog post on the Science is on, it's entitled, My Career, My Non-Academic Husband and Me. And it's a woman who's in France. She's been in France, Sweden, and the United States. And she talks about the challenges and the pluses of having a non-academic scientist husband. But there are times when they don't understand the demands of what you need to do, or their friends don't understand the demand. Why can't your wife ever come out at 6 o'clock? Why is she having to cancel? Can the bacteria really be more interesting than going out, to a bar? And so it's a really interesting, and she talks about, the challenges, needing to constantly adjust our weekends and evenings to my lab schedule wore on him. And I was angry with myself for denying us more time together. On the other hand, whenever I postponed an experiment so that we could have a lab-free weekend together, the decision left me stressed. I sometimes felt I was losing on both ends, and I envied my colleagues who had partners who shared their lifestyle. And so, it both ways, 2 scientists or not, And then, for those who don't have a partner, dating. When do you have time to date? I mean, you're always in lab, and who are you meeting? The other people in the lab.
Right. That's a whole other issue.
I have family. I have 2 kids, 3rd grade kids. And so judging from the amount of time I have to commit to their interests, no kidding, you can find time today.
Especially because bars are open late. Unlike
Bingo, yes.
Third grader, you know.
Oh yeah, they have to be in bed
You
by
can,
9.
right. You can finish your experiment and go out.
Yeah.
Especially in Shreveport. I mean,
Yeah.
And kind of a branch off, and I promise this is probably the last time we talk.
No, these are great. It's better to have your all issues than mine.
It's like more like me and Mike. Well, and I'm like relatively recently married and recently a father. But off of the two scientists or just two people.
Scientists are people.
Right. Well,
I doubt it sometimes.
the jury's still out. From a man's perspective, or maybe a woman's perspective, I don't know because I'm a man and I don't know your perspective that well. But me and one of my lab mates, who was actually a postdoc in the lab, who, we were like thick as thieves. We always were hanging out because we were always in the lab together. But we used to always have the same types of issues when it came to dealing with our significant others. Really the idea of like, are you really in the lab? Are you really in the lab? It's 12 o'clock at night. Are you really in the lab? Just the idea, and I think it goes to just explaining that yes, it really is that demanding, or yes, I don't plan experiments really well, so I get stuck. At 36-hour time points that are at midnight or at 2 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes just for really good data, it's like, I'm gonna wait until the cells are exactly ready and I'm gonna harvest them right then, I'm not gonna wait. So in that blog post that you mentioned, I was like, how do you explain that? And it really gets through to somebody who does not live the lifestyle.
Right.
It's like, it's almost impossible no matter what. And especially with certain cultures, particularly the culture I'm from, there's a lot of distrust, just because I'm young, and of course my wife met me and I was young and young active, so the idea of like really you're just working, you used to just be out all night, now you're working all the time,
Yeah, well, I have a comment on that, little comment. I had the same issue, and 2 years ago my wife started to work here as a research associate. No more questions.
That's what I have to do.
That's the only way to explain.
Well, and there's a certain amount of, bring your spouse to work day kind of thing, or bring your partner to work, I remember when my husband and I were dating and I was in Colorado, and he would come visit me, he would come in with me on the weekends and label tubes. And he's like, does it really take this long? I'm like, you don't understand. You could be labeling tubes for hours, when I say I have to go in and label tubes, it's like, how long can it possibly take to label tubes? He's like, it takes a long time to label all, this was before they made the PCR strips, and you had to label each little PCR tube that you were doing back in the old days. So, it took a long time to do that. So yeah, sometimes, bringing them to work to actually see, in Minnesota, I had my own animal facility. I wasn't part of a centralized one because I did developmental work. And that was wonderful. It was a lot cheaper, but it meant that my animal caretaker only worked regular times and didn't come in on holidays. I had weekend animal care, but on Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day, I had to go in and change the rat cages. And you really have to go in and I'm like, you want to come in and help? And he came in once to help and said, no, really, I believe that you have to go in and change it. That's not an excuse. It's not a euphemism. It's really, So it can be tough for people who haven't lived the academic or research lifestyle to really understand that there are things that you really have to do. My -80 freezer calls me, way too often when the power goes out here. And it's like, I really do have to go in at 1 o'clock in the morning when the -80 freezer calls me, because that's a whole lot of stuff in that -80, and I'm not going to just trust that the power is going to come back on in 15 minutes. I want to be in here to make sure. So I'm going to add something else along this area that what you said made me think of, and it's again both kind of a challenge and an opportunity, and goes along with the people that you do, and that can be that you can develop close relationships with colleagues, other students, peers, and often they're the opposite sex. And that can be a challenge from a work-life balance perspective. You're in a laboratory, you're working closely with people, and I'm going to use the word intimate, not in the sexual sense, but in the sense that you become intellectually intimate with individuals, and you develop close relationships as you become faculty or postdocs, and you start collaborating with individuals. And one of my students once made the comment about, is collaborators just a euphemism for, having an affair? And I'm like, no. you talk to your collaborators, you go to meetings and do work with your collaborators, it means you're collaborating. It doesn't mean anything more than that. But it can be hard for people outside of the realm of science to understand, and those relationships can be very significant and important. And sometimes your spouse can get a little jealous of the amount of time that you spend. I was working on a grant with a colleague and spending lots of time Skyping and on the phone, and then I went to New York, he actually came here. It's like, you really need to spend all this time writing a grant? I'm like, yes, I really need to spend all this time writing a grant.
I mean, but sometimes even when it's not, like with me and my postdoc, who's now, postdoc friend, who's now faculty at Northwestern, it's like, yeah, we hang out and we go for coffee every day, and he calls me, like, if he has a brilliant idea, 99% of the time it's a brilliant idea that has something to do with something I'm doing.
Right.
I'm going to pick up the phone. It may not be an appropriate time, but I'm going, hey, okay, all right, good, and hang up, and that's really that was the only pass. But I had to kind of explain that that's how it works.
Right. The intensity of relationships, the bonding that you do as a student, as a postdoc, and as a colleague is significant. The relationship you have with your mentors can be complex. They can be very nurturing. They can be parental-like. They can be fighting. They can be, and it's hard sometimes for a spouse to understand the complicated nature of a relationship with a student and a postdoc to their mentors. Sometimes it's just very professional, like a boss. But other times it's a more complicated relationship, and their expectations become very important to you. Sometimes more important than your spouse's expectations. And so when they say there's another 7 months we can work on this project, and your spouse has just gotten into the mindset, okay, we're getting, and so it can be hard to balance. It's a different kind of relationship.
I know I said it was right. Just with that point, and it just popped into my head because it's actually happened before. Like my thesis mentor actually relocated, and in the process of him relocating or negotiating his relocation package, the question came up.
Right.
Do you want to go? And I'm still in the process of nurturing my fledgling marriage, but at the same time, it's like, ooh, I can move, because I'm tired of this city, and all that.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that comes up is kind of that idea of disclosure. Like, is it a time to talk about it? Do I have enough information to make that conversation?
Right.
Because I don't know if any of you guys ever had that conversation with someone and you didn't have all the information and all you did was just create a hornet's nest. Like, something might happen, but I don't know when. And now they're sitting there asking you every day.
Right.
It's like, I will tell you when something happens, and so that type of thing. And then, especially when they find out that you knew so long ago, and you didn't say anything, it's like, your name's Mud, so.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of close relationships, I found interesting things. And sometimes you have friends in your life, really friends, that you go to barbecue with, at the bars. On the other hand, sometimes you have few people in the department and lab that you can talk science,
right,
or lab-related stuff all day long, and you feel fantastic and you're amused. Once you go together and start talk about non-science related issues, you have no idea what to say,
right?
Because so I would say that this relationship, you just have to say, why this guy's calling me of the lab business? Because we work together and there's nothing more between us. But if other like friends relationships, it's different, and that may be more.
Right, and often there can be contentious relationships in the laboratory. Now, lab life isn't all harmonious all the time.
Yeah.
There can be competition in the lab that's very hard to deal with, and you can kind of take that home with you and take that into your other. So as important as these relationships are, it's also important to have friendships outside of the laboratory as a balance, because it is very easy to be competitive. I mean, we're all of us who've gotten to this point have at least some amount of competition and ambition. It's kind of disingenuous to say, oh no, I'm not. I mean, to get to this point in our career, we've been somewhat ambitious and somewhat competitive. And that doesn't mean that we can't work with our colleagues really well, but sometimes it means that little bit of jealousy and competitiveness is going to come out. One of the things that I noticed after I had been here a couple of years in a faculty position was that I thought to myself that I was spending too much time at work, and I was working through my lunches, so my husband and I committed to have breakfast or lunch together at least once a week. And one of the nice things about Shreveport, and I'll put this in the opportunities side, is that for most people in Shreveport, they have a short commute. It's easy to get around to other places. You can go out for lunch and come back and it not take 3 hours, or you can go out for 3 hours if you'd like. But in a lot of large cities where there may be more opportunities, you may be commuting an hour a day. And that adds, talk about, in the lab till 10 o'clock and then, commuting home after that. Or your spouse is on the other side of the city and you're on this side and there's not a chance that you'll be able to, share a meal. So finding those little windows, and I also did it with my friends. I realized that I was not getting to see my friends outside of my work world enough. So one New Year's, my New Year's resolution was that I was really going to devote more time to my friends. I have wonderful friends here in Shreveport. I've made fantastic friends, and I wasn't getting to see them as much as I wanted to. And so I really committed for my New Year's resolution that for this year, I was going to actively engage my friends and be more available. So instead of working through lunch, I go out to lunch. I have a lot of friends who have small kids. And when their kids are in school, it's tough for them to go out at night with their kids, having to do homework and things like that. But, they can get together for lunch. So you know what? I'm going to go out to lunch. And I'm not going to feel guilty about it. Because I certainly work my hours or I'm going to go have a cup of coffee with somebody, at 10 o'clock in the morning and catch up with them, and then I'll work, an hour later. And so it's, in addition to your spouses, I think it's important, and your children, important to nurture those other friendships that you have, because they're going to be the ones that support you when your grant isn't funded, or support you when your grant is funded. Everybody else is like jealous of that, and they're going to, be your biggest cheerleader. So, that, take that opportunity to make sure you nurture and find some other outlet outside of here in order to meet people. And that can be challenging, especially when you move here and you don't know people yet. But as somebody who moved here 9 years ago, I can say that I think that the South in general and Shreveport in particular, the people are very nurturing and welcoming, in that it is a place that's not very closed off. It is a place where you can meet people. And I know we've got about 5 minutes or so left. I want to throw out just a couple of things that the science website mentioned in terms of work-life balance for you all to think about. I talked about finding time to do things outside of the lab and how important that is, but also thinking about the workplace. And I don't think we have a very family-friendly workplace here, with the exception of that Shreveport's small and it's easy to get to things. Parking, if you're not a graduate student, and you can actually get to your car in a reasonable amount of time. If you're a graduate student, you have to add that onto your commute time. But there are family-friendly workplaces, and so if this is something that is important to you when you're interviewing for jobs, is to look for one. When I was at the University of Colorado Medical School, my first year there, when my postdoc mentor, when she had her baby, the daycare center was in our research building. So she was able to nurse all the way through, just go downstairs. And then it moved to a different location that was just like 2 blocks away. She was able to engage with her child a lot. He had the chicken pox. She made a little nest for him in her office, and we all had the chicken pox. She brought him in, put him under there, so there are times when, you need to be flexible, and you need to have mentors who are flexible, and you need to just be honest and talk about it. And sometimes you just have to raise the conversation. You have to be the one that says, I need to make some accommodations for X, Y, and Z. And this goes the other end of the perspective too, as your parents start aging. I'm actually flying tomorrow because my dad had knee surgery this week, and I'm going to go help my parents out. It's not just when you have small children, but as your parents start aging, as other family members have health conditions, there may be times when you need to go be with your family. And scientists should be humans, should be people, and should understand, that is important. Support systems, organizations like this, friends. But I also encourage you, if there are times in your life where you're really not being able to find that balance, to talk to somebody about it. There are good counseling centers here in Shreveport that are low cost, that deal with family issues, that deal with marital counseling, that deal with children's issues. There's one called, I think it's the Family Counseling Center. It has family in the name. Don't be embarrassed to say, I need help figuring out how to do this. Just because you have a PhD or are smart or know how to run a Western blot doesn't mean that you're going to be able to figure out all the dynamics of life. And I think about it from the perspective is that we're all really well trained in what we do, and if you needed advice on some physiological process or some neuroscience project, you go and talk to an expert who's been trained in that. We should be very comfortable going to people who are well trained in helping people figure out what to do. So using the support systems that are available. And then time management. All I can say is I am really glad that I was a graduate student in the pre-Facebook, pre-social media, pre-internet era, because there wasn't a whole lot to do besides what you were supposed to be doing in the lab. And so in between experiments, you read articles because there really wasn't anything else to do while you were there. And so time management has become much more of a challenge, I think, in the kind of electronic digital era, because there are so many things competing for our time. That can be good in that it allows us to have that support and stay connected and be friends and be part of a community. But it can also be a major time suck. And it can take you away from writing your paper. Oh, I'll just check Facebook for 5 minutes, right? And then you've now, looked at 30 different sets of wedding pictures of people you have no idea who they are. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't like that bridesmaid's dress, and you really didn't. But one click leads to another, and then you've just that 30 minutes of manuscript writing now is gone. And so really thinking about prioritizing. The last thing I'll say is that on the science site, they have this really good work-life balance chart about kind of how to prioritize your tasks, things that are urgent or not urgent, things that are not important and important. So for example, not important and not urgent would be things like gossip, March Madness pools, some email. Urgent but not important are interruptions, which they happen. Some email, many administrative tasks. How many of you have got that? You have neglected to do that training that you were supposed to do 3 months ago. That's urgent. It's probably not important. You already know that you're supposed to wash your hands when you're done. But it is urgent because you failed to meet the training. Important, but they're not urgent. This is a category that we all struggle with. Reading journal articles, It's very important, but it's not urgent. Nobody's gonna, you know, kill you for not doing that. Next month's grant deadline, recreation and relaxation, ongoing experiments, relationship building. Those are really important things that you have to carve out time for, but they may not be urgent. There's nobody standing over you saying you have to do them now. Urgent and important, crises, pressing problems, deadline-driven projects, a lab fire. I would tell my students, and you'll often see this on, you know, unless the lab is on fire, do not bother me today. Tomorrow's grant deadline is both important and urgent, and an inquiring boss is both important and urgent, although sometimes that should be in the not important and not urgent category. So the main take-home message from this, and that talking and sharing your experiences with each other are really valuable for at least knowing that you're not alone in struggling to how to manage all of these things. So I encourage you to kind of keep talking about these issues.
I have lost command. I think that if anyone struggles with the personal relationships being a scientist, show your spouse this video. They will know that we think about that.
Right, that you all really are trying to find that,
Really?
that elusive balance. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Liz.